At Avast, we are committed to making the internet a safe place for everybody, and collaborating with others is fundamental, especially with people who kind of share our point of view with what needs to be done. And this is why it is an absolute delight to be joined here today by Richard Perlotto, who is the director and founder at Shadowserver. Richard, could you introduce yourself?
Good morning, and thank you for the time today. I understand with the current events in the world today, it is a difficult time for all of us, especially when dealing with cyber threats. I've been involved in leading Shadowserver for almost 16 years at this point. My background comes from working primarily in the tech industry as a security defender for over 25 years. Shadowserver's mission is there to make the internet more secure by bringing light to the vulnerabilities, malicious activities, and emerging threats. We collect intelligence and data from various cyber partners. This is combined with our own collections where we scan the internet to look for vulnerable and misconfigured devices. We run honeypots to reveal security vulnerabilities through criminal attacks, conduct malware analysis to map out criminal technologies and cyber criminal infrastructures. All of this to combat malicious activities to help victims by reporting this out to network owners anywhere in the world. As a nonprofit, we rely on funding from like-minded companies that believe in our mission and want to help us maximize the impact of our work. It's vital that we collaborate with industry-leading organizations like Avast, who share our vision and values. Their threat insights contribute to the intelligence we can share with our constituents, network owners, national search, and law enforcement agencies.
So, I know that we've had a really long relationship. So it goes back, I think, for more than a decade, way before I joined Avast at CISO last year. So it's just been a consistent relationship of sharing threat intelligence, and really trying to figure out how to collaboratively take stuff down that would be harming just regular users. And I think one of the fundamental things is that our partnership has always been based on this idea that the more people that are on the same side doing the right thing, the greater the degree of chance that we have to take down the bad actors. So, at Avast, this partnership, it allows Shadowserver to use the Avast and AVG data that's produced by our engines, and reciprocally, we get so much stuff from you guys in terms of newly detected malware binaries, and that's daily. And I think this reciprocal relationship makes sure that you guys can do your thing while we protect, the 430 million customers that we have, and a lot of those customers are customers who take the service up for free. So it should be fair to say, like, we're using that telemetry to help everybody else. And I really feel like it's our mission to make sure that we share the information that helps us all make everything secure. And that's only going to be possible if we work together. And so while we want to share these insights, which are important, we're also really aware that you guys as a nonprofit can't do this by yourself, and that's why this year we wanted to donate $500,000 to the Shadowserver Foundation, just to make sure. And I loved how Krebs on security put it. He basically compared you guys to the Ghostbusters, about to like release all of that stuff into the wild. And I'm really glad we could help the Ghostbusters of the internet, if you will. And this is like an age test to say that. I mean, yeah.
I unfortunately fit into that same age as well, probably even more than you do. The collaboration has always been an interesting thing. I mean, the whole purpose of Shadowserver has always been there to be that neutral third party who can improve things for the internet itself, to drive remediation further in. And that's one thing I learned of being a longtime defender of corporations and networks, in that as long as there's other organizations who may not understand or know what to do, your job as a defender is always more difficult. And
Yeah.
so Shadow Server was really that effort to drive those things forward
Hmm.
so that we can then push data that people can remediate or look at what they need to do on their own networks to improve things. I mean, we can look at just through our scanning over the last 5 years, we've reduced the threat footprint of DDoS attacks by over 65 million devices.
Hmm.
which is a huge
Hmm.
amount of remediation that has occurred. And that's only possible through the collaboration of not only organizations such as yourself who take our data, but also the network owners.
Yeah. So, in all transparency, before I worked at Avast, I used to be CISO of KPN, and that's actually how I met you guys because I was working with Europol, and I met Stu, who is quite notorious in his own right. Um, and so this is when I really was familiar, also because we were also working with your feeds. But maybe you could explain a bit about how Shadow Server specifically helps, like the FBI and Europol and Interpol, to actually investigate cybercrime all over the world.
Okay. So one of the things that we want to kind of address, two of our key principles are that we do not actively kind of court public relations around our work with law enforcement. And
Right.
we never do anything to undermine an ongoing investigation. So you'll understand if we don't talk about any current live operations that we have. Only after a case is made public by law enforcement do we talk or blog about it, and only when the security investigating officer's approval. And many times we only blog about it when they ask us, because the truth is we're busy kind of conducting the mission and not really concerned about touting the thing that we did. There are takedowns frequently during the year that you never hear about, whether it's through law enforcement or other organizations that we're involved in, but we'll never really kind of talk about what we've done related to that. So there's only a subset of the cases that we work are actually even on our website or even made public. It's important to understand the scale of many of these operations that we support. They often last many months or even years, depending on the complexity and reach. Is this the nature of the complex and international anti-crime investigations, which
Hmm.
usually overlap many jurisdictions where investigators have to mesh together various legal systems and occasionally overcome political differences to make their progress. One significant example is Avalanche, where the investigation ran over 3 years before the 2016 takedown. And we were involved in only the last 18 months of that. And so the investigators in Germany ran that
Hmm.
case for a year and a half before we got involved to start moving it forward as far from a technical standpoint. We did
Hmm.
the sinkholing, over the last 4 years, and it still continues. We were
Hey, Richard, I'm just realizing that a lot of people may not even know what sinkholing exactly entails. Perhaps you could explain it briefly?
that's probably a good thing. I'm used to speaking to uh, a technical audience many times and not always knowing what things are. So we use a lot of different kinds of terms. And sinkholing is fundamentally when, through a variety of means, we will take over a criminal infrastructure and we'll redirect that to a set of servers that we will control, whether it's us or one of the partners. Many times we work with Microsoft or other organizations as a part of that takedown. And then the sinkhole basically is a set of servers that will then either do the same kind of communication that the previous control point did that the criminals had, or just accept all the different types of traffic. And then from that, when all the victims then connect to the sinkhole, we can then derive out what the IP address is and minimal information. I mean, we're not really looking for the PII or any of the detail. If there's exfiltration of data, we're not capturing it. That we're really looking at how can we identify the system so we can report it out to the network owner, whether it's organization, companies, or ISPs, or whatever it might be, so they can then do the remediation. But the Avalanche one was done with the Lower Saxony German LKA, which is kind of the state level police. The German BSI, who operates the German National CERT, Europol, FBI, and many other law enforcement agencies around the world were all involved as a part of that takedown. One of our primary private partners was the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany as well, basically helping us do a lot of the reverse engineering and to be able to take down the Avalanche delivery platform. Avalanche is a very interesting one because it was one of the larger cybercrime as a service platforms. It was built to reliably control and manage over 20 different malware strains, including different baking trojans, ransomware, and even Android malware. The associated botnet was responsible for at least hundreds of millions of dollars of losses to the victims globally. And those numbers might even be low, depending on what you look at. I mean, while law enforcement can many times seize the systems when they have those opportunities, and you can kind of look at the real numbers, it's difficult many times to kind of quote real value losses to the public because sometimes they seem too fantastic. Or you get someone who's overly enthusiastic and the numbers are overly inflated. And so most of the time when law enforcement states the money after a takedown, they're usually a fairly conservative amount. I mean, we've definitely seen, they'll say, oh, it's $100 million, and we'll look at the database from the criminals and we'll go, well, it was really about $500 million, and that's happened several times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we assisted in the tracking and analyzing of the malware families using a fast flux command. They're basically between fast flux is to have numerous IP addresses associated with a single fully qualified name, where the IP addresses have been swapped in and out with extreme high frequency through the changing DNS. So the infrastructure was seized and taken down in
Hmm.
several countries, and several of the actors were arrested, and then with multiple follow-up cases that were generated. Working with the Department of Justice and DNS registry operators, again, sinkholing or blocked nearly 5.5 million domain names that could have been used by the criminals for the further victimization. And so if we didn't take these over, that means other criminals potentially could have utilized that related infrastructure and impacted those victims again.
Yeah.
So we report out these sinkhole infections on a daily basis, free to almost 6,000 network owners, almost 130 national certs. And we're still reporting out over 2.5 million uniquely affected IP addresses on a daily basis from the high of over 3.5 million when we did the original takedown. So, and this is only possible due to the long established reputation and position,
Hmm.
as a nonprofit working with these with these organizations long term. And you can read a lot more about this from on our website.
I just saw that. That was adorable. No, we didn't have to push him away.
I have to apologize. I
No.
had the door closed earlier, and so the cat has he spends most of his day sitting on me. So
It's so funny. I always have to think of like Jurassic Park, when they say life finds a way. I feel like that especially applies to cats. They always find a way. I have the same sort of persistent attack cats. Yeah. Anyway, but while we continue, I just wanted to know, in terms of doing all this stuff, we actually use quite a bit of your data, just so you know. And I feel like it really genuinely helps us do all kinds of stuff to protect our customers. And especially around this crazy time that we're seeing around the pandemic, with new threats that are COVID-19 related. We see so many new threats attacking so many different individuals globally that it's a bit insane. We're actually sinking in the volume of things that we're trying to counter. And it runs the gamut, to be very honest, from like stalkerware to tracking software that's not just stalkerware but like coronavirus kind of related. We also see a whole bunch of iOS related threats and Android malware, and it's just crazy. Even stuff that's being spread from TikTok. And we see an incredible surge in nation state related activity. So, like a lot of nation state related activity. And this is really worrying because we are, we look from the lens, and we've published about this. So, to be fair, I'm not giving anything away now, but we've published about APT related stuff in Central Asia. Is the cat still there, Richard?
yes,
Yeah.
he's floating around somewhere on the floor.
Yeah. So, do you guys see the same? I mean, are you concerned about the nation state stuff? Because arguably that must be a very difficult thing, because it's not you're not really dealing with any single agency, if you will, to try to counter that.
Yeah. So I think the difficulty that we're seeing really around all of these things, and it has definitely accelerated with the pandemic, is the mixing of activity. So you've got the state sponsored activity, you've got the cybercrime activity, and then you've got hacktivism, which is also occurring quite strongly, and sometimes for good causes, and sometimes for less good causes. And differentiating what each of those are is getting more difficult as time goes on, as they utilize each other's style of attacks and methodologies, right? And so you can see state-sponsored stuff hiding as hacktivism. You can see criminal behavior hiding as different things. You can see, I mean, so as the pandemic has hit, you've got quite a few kind of state-sponsored organizations that have less capability to fund some of their efforts. And many of them are beginning to use criminal type behaviors, the exact same kind of thing, where it's oh, we're going to do phishing, we're going to do ransomware as a quick
Mm-hmm.
way to get money to fund the efforts that are going on. And
Mm-hmm.
so attributing this and differentiating it is nearly impossible these days, where it all feels and smells the same to us. And where we're really seeing a lot of this go is really kind of cybercrime as a service. And
Yeah.
historically,
Yeah.
criminal groups have operated and developed their own malware and then went to exploit it themselves. But now you're seeing a far more organized and professional approach where
Mm-hmm.
crime platforms are developed and operated and maintained by highly agile developer groups, and then sold as a service to affiliates around the globe. And that includes to state sponsored and activism groups.
And are we talking about exploit kits, or are you talking about other types of services?
It's what we're really talking about is not necessarily hacking as a service, but providing platforms, right? Much how we have software as a service and many other types of things, cloud services. We're seeing the criminals adapt many of the same kinds of concepts that we're utilizing for business for their business, in that they'll provide the old term was bulletproof hosting, but
Mm-hmm.
basically an agile way. They may provide the infection mechanisms and the delivery. So you may provide, here's the final piece of code I want. I want this delivered in these countries, or I want it delivered on these kinds of targets.
Mm-hmm.
And then this infrastructure then is now delivering these things for the criminals or whomever is paying them, right?
Yeah.
And then at that point, then the second stage, so the systems are basically getting, if you want to call them compromised or hacked more than once through this delivery mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like when we try to identify what types of attacks are actually being conducted by these cybercrime as a service providers, what kind of things are there? Are we talking about DDoS? Are we talking about malware? Are we talking about combinations?
It's basically a combination of everything. I mean, even to the point like Avalanche, as an example,
Yeah.
um, also even provided over 50,000 mule accounts. So they
Yeah.
even provided a way of exiting the money after you've seized the assets. And so it could be, the infrastructure then, would deliver, here's the ransomware, right? So you're
Right.
already infected with Avalanche at the same time delivering the ransomware, such that, then they could monetize it through that way, the organization that provided the ransomware, or whether it's phishing, or whether it's an exfiltration of data, or it could be just that an organization is looking for a small footprint in a particular company or location that they can then exploit themselves further from that point. Because getting
Mhm.
that first entry point could be difficult. And by having these platforms do it for you, you can then negotiate, SLAs. Criminals
Yeah.
have
Yes.
service level agreements on performance of well, if I don't get at least this many things, your service is free this month.
Right. I would say we should never underestimate the entrepreneurship of criminals. Because I have to say, very often I'm always really impressed by like darknet marketplaces that warn their own customers of watch out for that phishing attempt, and we've been seeing this. So they're really good at communications, at agreeing, SLAs, but also service downtimes. So I don't think we should underestimate them at all. That being said, to be really honest, when I was at a telco, I used to be worried a lot about things like DDoS, but I actually don't see it as big as a threat anymore. And if you take a look at the IOCTA report, for example, from Europol, like the Internet Organized Crime Assessment, one of the things that they noticed is that although the potential for creating real havoc is there, there's not an actual a lot of activity going on. Instead of like focusing on where there is a lot of where there's not a lot of activity, where do you think there is a lot of cybercrime activity happening now? Like in what actor space or in what area?
The I think the easy money is definitely continues to be in ransomware,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we see that continue to grow, extortion based crime. I mean, you're seeing traditional criminal activity and criminal behavior moving to the internet. It's been the case for the last 20 years, and it's just all accelerating. And ransomware is fairly easy. You can do data exfiltration. I mean, in another way now, you can also do shaming. You can contact news organizations and say, hey, this hospital can no longer conduct business, or with the EU, you can be concerned about fines with regulators under data breach legislation under GDPR. Now,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how some of these things occur, there's a multitude of different ransomware things making the headlines due to intrusions in hospitals, governments, and many businesses. And we continue to see this trend continue until everyone can really look at offline backups, are routinely maintained and recovered.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
many times these ransomware, like I said earlier, is the secondary infection delivered by something else. And so something else has already breached the perimeter through that delivery mechanism. And the ransomware is just kind of the symptom that you see right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that worried me a lot last year was seeing that a nation state actor like North Korea was really dominant in the ransomware space, and Kim Jong Un was like the OG gangsta of ransomware, which is really quite funny because usually state actors aren't so interested in financially oriented cybercrime. But did you guys ever encounter them or?
Well, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier in that, you have the state sponsored, you get the standard cyber criminals, and you get the hacktivism. Differentiating them at this point is getting more difficult. And even the attribution is getting harder without adding some form of government assistance to kind of go, yes, that came from North Korea. Yes, that came from some Western country. Just due to the scope and the size. I mean, we collect nearly 1 million unique pieces of malware on a daily basis to our repository. That's sitting at over 1.3 billion samples, right? And,
Mhm.
and it's growing by over nearly 1 million a day, and attempting to analyze those. I mean, so we have to look at a huge amount of automation and the ability to kind of individually focus on these things, or really on the investigative tracks when we can
Yeah.
work with law enforcement in those cases.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And just to kind of like to round it off back to where we started. I mean, one of the things I was really worried about last year was the continuity of Shadow Server being able to do the good work that you do for everyone. But I have a question that's maybe not so much about what you guys already have done, but what do you see as the future of Shadow Server? What are your dreams for doing more or doing something different, or what do you hope to do?
So obviously, the funding difficulty that we faced caused us to make some operational changes for 2020. Right, we had to cut back um, some of the operations that we're doing. We had to cut back some of the even the headcount that we have, and so progress in some of these technology pieces and stuff were put on hold. 2020 was really about the refocusing of Shadow Server and looking at what the next future needs to be. So Shadow Server historically has been fairly black box as far as its finances, whether it's management, and even how we go about different things. And that model is changing. I mean, we're looking into expanding the board and doing many other things, such that we're going to bring in the community in, where it's going to be a
Oh,
community
wonderful.
driven project as opposed to just black box. The black box was really important in the beginning because no one believed in what we wanted to do, right? Being an absolutely altruistic organization who's there to kind of improve things on the internet without making money. And we luckily had a sponsor that was willing to pay those bills for 15 years,
Yeah, which is wonderful. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so the futures really are about, this year was the recovery, this through the exit from the sponsor, and then, in the next month or two, we're hoping to start announcing some of the different models. I mean, we're looking at basically announcing an alliance model where we can have organizations on an annual basis contribute to Shadow Server for sustaining our efforts. Looking at expanding out the different kind of, we're going to have an advisory board that we can have working groups focusing on some of these things. I mean, we're talking about some DDoS groups. We're talking about some ransomware groups, but really move this into the community, right? What we can't have happen is to have Shadow Server be a company of one, or a personality of one, right? So we need to make sure that there's continuity and sustainability, not only financially, but also organizationally. And that's the purpose of expanding the board and adding in, national search and adding in, consumers, but also having this alliance model where many more organizations can focus and help us drive the mission that we need to do and take it to the next level. I mean, we've been fairly reluctant to kind of do this because we didn't want to rock the boat with our sponsor. At the same time, you know, we were really focused on the mission. I mean, down, really inside, we're all techies and nerds. And that's what we do. And that's what we do well. And what we don't do as well was kind of managing those other pieces. And that's kind of what we're stepping away from, or stepping into now is it's expanding into those things, outsourcing our finances. So that way that's managed in a very consistent, strict way. And talking to many other organizations such as yourselves about, okay, well, what else should we be doing? Because
Yeah.
we want to be symbiotic to the industry, not parasitic, right? We want to make sure that we're adding value to not
Yeah.
only the consumers but also to the industry itself, while not breaking the basis of our mission and our what we call our morals and ethics.
No, I fully agree with that. And again, as a loyal user and as a fervent supporter, I would love to help you guys, as with the rest of Avast, would love to help you guys make sure that you continue the wonderful job you do. Because honestly, if people just knew how much you meant to the stability and the resiliency of the internet just today, never mind tomorrow, I mean, I think they would be flabbergasted and happy to contribute. So I think it's also part of making sure that everybody knows just how much you contribute so that they begin to understand what they need to contribute to you.
And 2020 was very eye opening on not only the companies that stepped forward, but also the individuals. I mean, we've had to a point now nearly 800 individuals donate anywhere between $5 to $1,000.
Yeah.
We've picked up, these people are, and some of them are even repeating it on a monthly basis where here's $5 or $10 every month. Well, while that doesn't necessarily pay the bills, what it does is it's accumulation of the effort and showing the need. I mean, we've been around doing this for a long time, doing it very quietly. And while we're not going to necessarily toot our horn related to the takedowns and stuff, I think being in the community will be a little more vocal in driving some of these agenda items and moving these things forward. Particularly, we're going to have a lot more involvement with other organizations such as Avast, and working toward that bigger goal. I mean, eventually, I would like to retire. I know my wife would like me to retire one day, although she already gives me, said, well, you have to work at least an extra 2 weeks because I need this. So, oh, you have to work for an extra 2 weeks because you need that. So I think that may continue for at least another 10, 20 years, but we'll see.
Well, I can just say that we wish you well, and we're happy to support you, and we really hope that we can be part of your future journey. Thanks, Richard.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate all the time. And I can't express enough how much we appreciate the sponsorship that Avast has given us. I mean, we've enjoyed the relationship we've had you guys for a very long time. You guys have always been very professional, always presented us, the quality information, quality people that we needed to work with, and that has always been something that is part of what we enjoy doing. What we do is coming across the or people and organizations that we can work with and understand that, well, if I get them involved, they're going to do what needs to be done, as opposed to arguing it or what's my gain or those kinds of things.
No, we're not about that. But it was really good to talk to you today. And let's make sure you guys get to continue the conversation online. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for being our guest today. And yeah, I think everyone who is listening should just kind of go to shadowserver.org and see how you can contribute. Even if it's not just financial, just see what these guys are busy with and do a bit of that community building around Shadow Server. Thank you.